Hello, my beautiful friends. So the other day I found a video where a small YouTuber responded to me on one of the responses I made to Computing Forever. I figured that responding to someone who responded to me is more entertaining in terms of content. Does anyone else feel that way, or is it just me? So yeah, let's do this. His video is almost 30 minutes long, and if I responded to the whole thing, then the length of the videos will just keep creeping upwards. So I'm going to try to cut out as much of Computing Forever as I can, and we'll just respond to, say, the first half. And of course, this guy makes a lot of useless and not so good comments, so we'll be cutting out those too. Of course, if you want the full context, the original video is always linked in the description. Alright, let's do this.
Symbol of submission to the new regime.
Yeah, face masks are a dehumanizing symbol of submission.
They weren't always that way. It wasn't until the left wing tried imposing them onto everybody that people suddenly started seeing them as symbols of oppression.
I don't understand why people keep trying to make this a political issue. It shouldn't be. If you say the left, you are creating a sense of us versus them. Now, I don't want to make this political at all. It's a public health issue. It concerns every single one of us. And the last thing you want to do is generalize. In certain places, such as grocery stores or public transportation vehicles where people can be in very close proximity to each other, we can reduce transmission significantly if everyone wears a face mask.
Well, sure, I'll agree that there may be certain locations where there may be a higher risk of transmitting the virus, and perhaps you could make an argument to justify mandating masks in those particular locations. The problem is a lot of places are mandating masks across the board, not just in these particular locations.
So yes, of course, in certain places with higher densities of people, such as public transportation or grocery stores, masks are absolutely necessary, because these are prime areas in which COVID is being transmitted. I'm glad you at least somewhat agree. Now, regarding enforcements of wearing masks in general when you're outside, I still think it is worth it, because even if the area is not crowded, you still come into close proximity with other people. If you stand within 6 feet of another person with COVID for a significant period of time, you are, by scientific definition, exposed. And grocery stores and public transportation aren't the only locations in which that can happen. Even just walking outside or waiting for an elevator could expose you to someone else. And it's not like we're asking for a lot, literally just a piece of fabric that covers your nose and mouth. And over this, people are throwing hissy fits. Now, I could understand somewhat if it was mandatory to wear heavy gas masks, but this is literally a piece of fabric. What kind of personal liberties is this infringing? I don't understand how some people could take something so small and think it's taking away something from them. It's ridiculous.
It's do as we say or else.
It's not for your own good, it's for everyone else's.
Oh boy, here we go again, the rhetoric about how the mask doesn't protect you, it protects those around you. This is commonly used as a rhetorical strategy to try and strawman people who criticize mask mandates as selfish, not caring about others.
I never held the belief that people who don't want to wear masks don't care about others, and that's because it's difficult for you to firsthand see the consequences of your actions here. If you're going around spreading the virus to other people and you never see them again, then they die from it a week later, you can't really feel the consequences of you not wearing a mask. It can't really be traced back to you and you never know about the death. That's just the nature of the situation. But of course, if you were given a knife and were asked to stab someone to death, I'm sure you wouldn't do it. Wearing a mask is equivalent to putting that knife down, but it doesn't feel like they have the same magnitude, because you're never there to witness the consequences of the former situation. So it's not necessarily because people don't care about others, they just can't see the full picture. Now, if you work in science and work in data, it's easier to broaden your view and see things from a grand perspective, which is why scientists around the world are all proponents of mask wearing.
But more often than not, that's the intention.
People are being required to wear regular masks, not the N95 ones. Regular masks protect you from spreading the virus to other people, but it's not really effective at protecting yourself.
Actually, there is some research that suggests that even plain surgical masks can be effective at protecting the wearer as well as those around them.
Yes, I agree. Masks are effective in both directions. But there's a nuance here. When modeling the effectiveness of masks, it's easy to look at the virus as free-floating particles that come into contact with the mask, in which case it is the same effectiveness in terms of protection in both directions. However, COVID is not like that and is transferred more through respiratory droplets rather than airborne. Of course, there is some good preliminary evidence that this virus can be airborne, but for the majority of time it rests on water particles. So yes, surgical masks can protect the wearer to some degree, one that is less significant than protecting others, however. But what I said in my original video goes a bit further and I simplified a bit. Either way, I don't see how pointing that out helps your argument.
I mean, just think about it for a minute. If you're a surgeon who's performing an operation on somebody, you're cutting open and dealing with the inside of a person's body. You're dealing with all different sorts of fluids, bacteria, Lord knows what. And while you probably don't want to infect the patient, you would probably also want the mask to prevent the patient from infecting you.
No, that's simply wrong. The surgical masks that surgeons wear are to protect the patient. It is to keep the area as sanitary as possible. Before a surgery occurs, the room is cleaned and disinfected as much as possible. Doctors have to scrub in, which is a whole procedure procedure in and of itself before entering the surgical room. Then they wear surgical masks because their own saliva and droplets can potentially infect the patient. When you're cut open, you're susceptible to all sorts of infections and invasions. That's one thing that your skin is supposed to prevent, and that is, of course, something that people take for granted. When you're cut open, you are incredibly susceptible, which is why the surgeon needs to wear a surgical mask. That is the primary reason. Now, what about the other way around? Is the surgeon trying to protect him or herself? You see, unless the patient is already pre-infected with something, which the doctor would already know about, by the way, the inside of a human body can be surprisingly clean. And even if they are infected, your skin does a fantastic job of keeping it out of your body. So you just have to be careful of ingesting any fluids from the patient. That's not a job for the surgical mask.
Think about it for a minute. If you were in a medical profession, if you were around people who are sick or dealing with all different types of tissues, fluids, Lord knows what, and you were handed a mask and told, here, it protects them but not you, I'd be like, no thank you.
You make a whole speech about a straw man of claiming people not wearing masks as not caring about other people. And then you give us a hypothetical example of exactly you not caring about other people. I'm not the type to go around claiming other people are selfish, but your statement here is a clear example of that. And to answer your question, of course I would fucking wear a mask if I were working in the medical field and was told it protects the patient. The idea is that if everyone is wearing the mask, then everyone is protected. You are protected from the fact that others are wearing the mask. So you have to also do your part and protect other people from you.
So when people argue that everyone has to be wearing a mask in order for the masks to work, this is essentially an admission that the masks are basically worthless. Because even if that were true, that everyone had to be wearing a mask in order for them to be effective, there's basically no chance in hell of that ever happening. The government does not have the resources to monitor every single person constantly to make sure that they're wearing a mask.
Of course, you can't possibly enforce this to every person in the country. That'd be ridiculous. But you're acting as if this is an all or nothing type of scenario. It's not that either 100% of the people wear masks and everyone is protected, or less than 100% wear masks and no one is protected. The more people that wear masks, the less spread there is, and the less cases of COVID there will be. There's plenty of gray area. We want to control this spread as much as possible. And to do that, we need to get as many people to wear masks as possible. 50% is better than 30%, for example. Just because we can't get every single person to wear masks doesn't mean we can't try to mitigate the damage by encouraging more mask usage. This is such a dumb argument. It's not a controlling thing, it's not a power thing.
So if this really is about genuine concern over health rather than just being a power grab, why are people being required to wear the inferior mask that only protects in one direction? I don't know about you, but if I was concerned about people's health and there were two types of masks, one only protects in one direction, the other protects in both directions, I would probably be supporting the mask that protects in both directions, no?
I love how you say, if I was concerned about people's health, basically admitting you don't. Well, whatever. I don't know where you've been or why you're so disconnected with the world, but there are good reasons why we don't enforce N95 masks. Firstly, because they are much shorter in supply. So when they are in short supply, the healthcare workers will have priority over them. For common civilians, not only are they not as exposed to the virus as healthcare workers, but regular surgical masks do the job just fine. Of course, if somehow we had enough N95 masks for every single person in the country and could supply more if needed, then of course having them wear N95 masks would reduce the spread of the pandemic. But sadly, that's just not the case. Surgical masks, however, are in decent supply and are pretty good at doing what they do. And then on top of that, they are also a lot more comfortable, so people would be willing to wear them. That's the reality of the situation. I mean, what's next? Requiring people to wear clothing and not to be naked in public spaces is also some sort of do what we say or else?
Well, again, like I said before, private property owners have the right to set the terms and conditions of the use of their property.
Being naked in public is illegal in many parts of the United States already. Are you going to write a speech about why that is taking away your personal liberties? Instead of answering the question, you're just going on about private property again. The fact of the matter is, there is law against it in public spaces.
When you wear gloves that transfer disease everywhere, those gloves have bacteria all over them. I'm wearing gloves. Not helping you.
What this doctor's saying right now is actually completely true. You see, gloves keep things sanitary only up to a certain point. At a certain point, the gloves become so saturated with bacteria and grime that you're actually spreading it around and making things less sanitary by wearing the gloves.
Yes, certainly. No one disagrees with that. The thing is, gloves in hospitals have to be constantly renewed. You don't just wear a single pair for an entire day and not change them at all. I used to work in laboratory research in hospital settings, and gloves are always being changed. There's even a small procedure to follow on how to properly remove your gloves so that contaminated parts don't come into contact with your skin. So what Dr. Erickson said here is useless, and I'm sure we can agree on that.
And well, guess what? The same thing goes for masks. Masks are effective at preventing the spread of pathogens from the breath that you exhale. That is, until the mask becomes saturated with those pathogens. Now the mask becomes a spreader of those pathogens.
You're misrepresenting reality here. If masks are not properly cleaned or replaced, then they become less effective. But unless you're licking the mask, it's not necessarily going to work in the opposite direction. Of course, you have to be smart about it. If you're not replacing your mask, don't wear it as if it's going to be nearly as effective. I agree that most people in the common public is not going to wash their cloth mask or replace their surgical masks after each session like they should. But that's not going to make things worse like you're implying. Even if the mask is replaced or washed only every so often, it's still better to wear a mask than not wearing one at all. It's funny how you're playing a clip from Dr. Erickson when he was debunked by so many other scientists and healthcare providers.
No links provided to any of these so-called debunkings in the description, just throwing that out there.
Sure, I didn't link anything in the description, but this was all over social media when it came out. You'd have to be living under a rock to not see all the criticisms. I also work with doctors a lot since I actually am one of the administrators and data managers for a COVID clinical trial. But for those who don't get as much exposure to scientists and doctors like I do, simply keeping up with social media was enough to know. Maybe to regular people who know nothing about science, what he says may seem legit at first. I assume you're part of that category of knowing nothing about science since you're playing the clip in your video. But if you're a biologist like me, or if you've studied any sort of high school science, it's pretty easy to recognize a lot of the nonsense Dr. Erickson is spewing here.
You see, the left has a very strange way of portraying science. They speak of it as if it's this monolithic body of knowledge that you either understand or you don't.
I'm literally a scientist. Don't even try to categorize me as, quote, the left. It's just a generalization. And as a scientist, I'm certain I have a better understanding of what science is and its processes than you do.
They seem to argue as if you have credentials in one particular field of science, you suddenly know everything there is to know about science.
Literally nobody claims that, and if there is someone who did, then that person is delusional. For me, I'm a biologist, so I certainly can speak to the pandemic, thank you very much. Nice straw man, by the way.
Or if you happen to make a scientific argument that they disagree with, they'll jump to the conclusion that you're ignorant about any and all science whatsoever.
I certainly can't speak for other people, but when I claim people don't understand science, they actually don't understand science. These people make ignorant claims all the time and think that what they believe is somehow more credible than data generated from actual scientific research. Not saying you fall under that category, but you making that claim just now makes me think you might be one of those people. Okay, so the next part he plays a clip of me explaining basic immunology and then admits he doesn't understand it, which is fine. I won't criticize people for admitting that, but that goes to show you why listening to experts is important. They understand things that you don't, so their advice is more valuable than a layman's. So when infectious disease experts around the world are recommending mask wearing, it's probably a good idea to listen to them. Anyway, that's the end of the video today, guys. Thanks for watching, and if I feel like it, I might make a part 2. Whenever I say that, I know I never follow through, so think of that as an empty promise. Thank you to all my patrons, especially Fireshard, Alan Morton, JN, and Miss Fixit for your generous support.